Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the workshop. And taking a little step back here, I've had a lot of questions recently about getting started in Lightburn or how do I connect my laser to Lightburn. So I thought I would take just a little time to create a bit of a getting started with Lightburn, specifically towards diodes. And in this one, we're going to be featuring the Lasermatic MK2, but hopefully this will apply to most of your diode lasers that a lot of the hobbyists or new people are getting started with. So we're going to jump into how to get the right version of Lightburn, how to get your laser connected, and then some of the basics of getting your laser working with Lightburn. And then we'll jump through a real quick project to kind of sum it all up. This is a very, very beginner friendly, very intro to Lightburn and using your laser. So if that interests you, something you think could be helpful, stay tuned. I'm going to jump right into it.
All right, so first thing we want to do is I want to jump over into Lightburn's website. They do have a few different versions of their software. I should say they have a different license levels for their software based on the type of device you're going to connect to it. Now, again, this is aimed at beginners, most typically looking at the diode lasers. So just be aware that if you're following this along and you have like a larger CO2 or a fiber laser, you're going to be looking at needing a different license code. The nice thing is if you get start out with a diode laser and you need to upgrade to one of those others, they do provide a discounted upgrade path to add on those license features as well. So let's jump into the Lightburn website and take a look at what's out there. All right, so the first thing we want to do is come out here to lightburnsoftware.com. Always go straight to the source on this one, and I'll have a link down below in the description for you to find this. It's not an affiliate link or anything. I've just been using their software for years. Happy to promote it because it's worked so well for me, and it is something that has worked with many lasers. So go to lightburnsoftware.com. And what you'll notice is right off the front, they're saying download the trial. And that's one of the great things about this software is they do give you a 30-day trial. It is full featured. It will work to the full extent. They don't restrict it at all. And so you can really test it out, see if it's something you like, see if it works with your laser before you commit to buying that. Once that 30 days is up, then you decide if you want to purchase it or not. So definitely take advantage of that free trial. Make sure it is going to work for you. Make sure that you can understand the software. And one of the most common things I hear from people is that it is intimidating. It's too much to learn. Well, hopefully myself and some of my other creators on YouTube can help get over that hump because it is a great software to use. It's not the end all be all software for everything. But when you start working with a variety of lasers or get into more advanced features, you'll be happy to have this software in your toolkit. What we want to look at real quickly is the purchase features. So you'll see here they have a few different licenses for different lasers. And so they kind of start from the basic and go on up. What we are looking at with most diode lasers is you need the G code version of the license. And that is just the controller type on the laser. It's how it communicates with the software itself. So with most diode lasers, you're going to be able to go ahead and get the G code software or version of it. And the nice thing there is that this is the cheapest one. Currently, at the time of recording this video, it is $60. And that is going to be good for any G code driven laser. So check yours. If it is a diode, 99% of the time it's going to be a G code license. The $60 does buy you a perpetual license of Lightburn. What you get with that is 1 year of free updates. So if they come out with a new version of the software, you're within that year, you are going to get that update. You're going to qualify for that. This license also allows you to install it on multiple devices that you own and work with as you as an individual. So you can use it on up to 3 different devices. So in my case, I have my laptop that I like to go portable with, as well I have my office desktop that I can work with. So things to keep in mind that it is a perpetual license. Now you will, after a year, be prompted with, hey, would you like to renew your software? And the confusing thing on that is it will still work. You just won't get any software updates at that point. So if you renew it, you will be able to continue to get those updates. And I believe in this version, that's generally just $30 a year. So in my mind, that's well worth it. They do continue to innovate and bring out new features. And so it's worth it. But that's a decision you'll need to make for yourself. The nice thing is, in any case, this is a one-time and buy, and you'll have that version and any updates that you get for a year. After that, you don't have to give them another penny. Now, if you do have other lasers, you may want to look at their other options. They do have, for a lot of the CO2 lasers, they have what are called DSP controllers. and that requires a little bit different license. And you see here, that's $120. Now, the nice thing is if you have this version and you do also have a diode laser, it will work with both. You don't need to get separate licenses. They kind of stack. So the higher you go, that kind of backfills to the others. So, and then as you get into some of our fiber lasers, you'll notice they have their Galvo license, and that works with the EasyCAD 2 type devices at this time. Again, as we're looking at this as beginner software or a beginner intro into this software, we're looking at the diode lasers. And so when you're looking to purchase it, you're looking at the G-code version. At the time of this video, that's $60. That should be all you need.
So now that we've talked about a little bit the Lightburn software, we're going to jump into hooking up the laser to it. Now, I'm not going to go through physically connecting your laser and whatnot. Most of them have their own instructions with that. Nice thing about the Rollei Lasermatic 2, there's not a lot of assembly involved. You pull it out of the box, and all I really need to do was hook up my exhaust vent here, and so that's going to the outside. Very important thing. If you're curious about that, I have another video on setting up an exhaust for your laser, as well as then hooking up the USB to the laptop. At that point, we'll be able to go into Windows, or if you're using Mac OS, you can go in there, make sure that the operating system detects it, and then at that point, we can jump into Lightburn. So most of the GRBL diode lasers will require the driver set. It should come on a USB stick with your laser. Otherwise, they are CH340 or 341 drivers that allow the computer to see the USB device as a serial input device. So let's take a look at software, making sure that our computer detects the laser, and then getting Lightburn to detect your laser as well. So let's jump back into the computer and get into the software.
So as I mentioned, the first thing we need to make sure is that the device drivers are installed and that Windows or Mac can see the device. Now, a lot of manufacturers, and Rollei Lasermatic does this, they include a USB drive. And what you can do is insert that into your USB port on your computer. And generally, they will have some driver files. So we're going to take a look at this. And here you see in this listing, we have USB to serial driver. And you'll see they have the CH341, both for Windows and Mac OS. So you'll want to run this file. And I already have. And so it's not going to allow me to install it, but it will go through a quick install, and it's going to basically say we're going to install this driver, and it'll give you some of the information on it. And I can click install here, but it's probably going to fail out on me because it's already installed on my computer. Yep, device install failure because I already have it there. If you do not, it should go through and it should say okay. And at that point, we can then move forward to turning on the laser and making sure that Windows or Mac OS will see it. All right, you generally with Windows are going to hear that little beep, little boop, and that means that the device was, or that the computer recognized that a device was connected. What we can do is actually, we can search for in Device Manager. What you're going to be looking for is down here in ports, and you're going to be looking for USB serial CH340. This one happens to be on COM5. Yours may not. The computer auto assigns that based on what other devices it detects and where it wants to put it. So don't be always looking for this on COM5. It will vary depending on the number of devices you have on there. But once you see that, you know that at least Windows saw your laser and has assigned the drivers to it. If this is your first time running Lightburn, it most likely asked you to already start the device setup. Otherwise, you can come down here to devices and you can look for your device that way. We're going to go ahead and hit devices. And as you can see, I've got a number of different devices from the various lasers I've used or worked with other people in the past. And at this point, we can do a couple things. We can do a Find My Laser, and that's going to automatically go out and search for your device. We can create manually, or we can actually do an import. For now, just ignore the Lightburn bridge. That's not something we're going to work with. Now, if you're working with a company such as Lasermatic, and they have provided you with a device file, you can go ahead and hit this import button, and then we're going to go to our USB drive, and you'll see here we have a Rollei Lasermatic MK2 and the LBDEV, so that's a Lightburn device file. you can go ahead and click on this and import it. And that's the beautiful thing there is it's going to have all the settings, all the macros and whatnot that you might need for their laser. If you don't have that, what you can do is hit Find My Laser, and this is going to go through and try to scan for your device. It'll tell you if it has found something, and then it'll start giving you some basic information. So if you're using a different device besides the Rolly Lasermatic, this may be a process you need to walk through. And this is going to take a little bit of time depending on how many devices are connected to your computer and such. So just let it go all the way through. And once that's done, we will step through the manual process. Once it's auto-detected, or if it hasn't, what you can do is step through these kind of manual setups. And what you're wanting to do is ensure that it is a GRBL device. And then you need a serial USB. At this point, you can name it whatever you want. So we're just going to call this a test Rolly Laser MK2. And now you are going to want to know the dimensions of your work area. Typically, a lot of these are 400 by 400, but double check that your documentation of the actual working area, not the outer dimensions. And then it's going to ask you where's the origin. Not all of them, but most of them are going to be front left for the origin, and that's where the machine will home to. It's where the limit switches tend to be. And if you get this wrong, you can go back and fix it, but you might notice that your items are either flipped left or right or top to bottom. So some of them, such as X-Tool and others, like to home in the rear left. A lot of CO2 lasers like to home in the rear left, but most GRBL diode lasers are going to be front left. And then you can opt for auto home on startup. I like to turn this off just in case there's something in the way that maybe there's material still in there and I had to reboot it and I don't want it to bump into that. I tend to turn it off because we can always select to home later. Once that's done, then hit finish and you will be good to go. So once you have your device set up, depending on if this is your only laser or not, you can come over to your drop-down menu and you can find the item. Now, this is the test one we set up, but I already have mine configured, so we're going to go ahead and jump to Lasermatic. Now, it should connect, and you should see if you have your console window open, it's eventually going to give you some basic information of the controller, and it's going to say OK, and most importantly here, where it says laser is going to say ready. At this point, Lightburn is communicating with your laser, and you'll be able to start working with it.
All right, so we've got our laser connected into Lightburn. Now we want to start playing around with it. And the thing that I'm going to recommend you do is going to be a material test, both in cutting and engraving. And we'll get to that in a bit. But one thing I also see people forget is making sure to focus your laser. So we're going to start out here. We have this is like 1/8 inch or 3 millimeter craft plywood. And we're going to get this set up in the laser. Now, every laser is going to be slightly different on how the focus works. And so you're going to want to, again, read the instructions there. But we're going to place our material here in the middle. And the Lasermatic has a focusing tool here. This is kind of stepped down. And if you read it, it has different settings for different thickness of materials. Now, if you're just engraving or cutting up to 1/8 inch or 3 millimeter, we're going to use this thicker spot here. And that's what that says. But as you get into thicker material, you actually want to lower the focus point of that beam more towards the center. And so they give a step down for 1/4 and also 3/8. So kind of keep in mind the thickness of your material. We're going with 3 millimeter 1/8 inch. We're going to be using the big focus extension here. So in the case of this one, all we need to do is set this down on our material. And this has a knob up on top that will raise and lower the laser. It also has kind of a locking screw on this side. So we're going to unlock the locking screw by loosening that up. And then we are able to rotate this, and that will raise this laser head up and down. So we're just going to slide that down to where it touches the top of the material. And we'll lock this in place. And now we have our material focused. If you don't focus your laser before running the material test, you're going to get numbers that are off. They're probably your engravings are going to be a little bit fuzzy, and your cuts are not going to be as efficient. So don't forget that step. Check your manual for your specific laser. The Lasermatic is really easy with just the 2 thumb screws to make the adjustment and the focusing tool. So Now that we have our focus set, let's turn the laser back on, jump into Lightburn, and I'm going to run the material tests real quick. I'm not going to go through that whole setup. I have a video that I've done before on setting up the material tests in Lightburn. I'll link those down below, so check that out, but let's run them really quick on this laser. Right, so we ran the material tests, and this is going to give us some ballpark settings on this material. And you're going to want to do this with any material you put it into your laser. So run it on any new material you can. Now we started out with the cut test, and this one is fairly easy to read. You'll see that there's a nice gradient here where the items were cut out versus where they were not. And so we have our speed and power settings on the top and bottom. And from there, we can say that it maxes out at 600 millimeters a minute and 100% power on this material. Again, different material is going to have different settings, which is why you want to run it on that. But in reality, you're going to run into some pockets of glue, maybe air voids, things like that. So I like to back it off a little bit. And you might not want to run your laser at 100% power for various reasons. So you might want to look at something in the 80 to 90% range and identify speed there. So on this one, I would say we're going to be good in the 80 to 90% range at 500 millimeters a minute and have some pretty good success cutting those out. So we can then put that into a material library or a notebook or whatnot, but know that if we want to cut out this material, if we use those speed and power settings, we'll be good to go. Now, as far as the other gradient, and this is more of the engraving, this is a little more, you can use it to gauge based on shading and darkness as well as depth to say in various scenarios you might want a deeper engrave, and so you're going to want to go a little slower, a little higher power, or you might want to just mark it without going very deeply. So now you're going to be looking at something a little bit faster and maybe a little lighter on the power. You get a little bit of gradient and shading, as you can see here. So you're going to not necessarily be locked into this is the setting I use for this material, but depending on the scenario, you can use this to say I want darker, deeper, I want lighter, less depth, or something in between. So these are good references to have. You can take photos of these. You can keep them, in a packet. A lot of times with the lasers, I'll put together a lot of my test materials into a bin or into like a Ziploc bag just so I can reference them later. But we will be able to now move forward and use these to create a little bit of a project. First off, let's though talk about the difference between vector and raster and how that affects working in Lightburn.
Within Lightburn, we can use two different styles of graphics. We can use raster images, which are a series of pixels that are shaded to create an image, but as you scale them up and down, those pixels stay the same size. Or there is vector, which is designs that are made up of lines and arcs and mathematical equations so that they can scale and they can be enlarged, they can shrink, and they don't lose resolution. So a curve will stay naturally curved, it'll be a nice sharp straight line. And so since they are paths made up from mathematical equations, the laser can also follow it as a path. So you can get a cutting operation on the outside of a vector, or you can get a fill operation on the inside of a vector, versus a raster image where you will only be able to shade those pixels via your laser's power, and it can't follow them as a path. So all it is going to be able to do is engrave them. So let's jump into Lightburn and see how those apply as well. How does that translate into working with Lightburn? Well, we have various things called layers, and those are going to appear up over here in the upper right will be where your layers and the information go. You also have the color bar down at the bottom, which is your various layers. So if we want to simply make a square, we can come over on the left side here. We can select our square, and this is going to draw a vector square. We drag it out, and now you will see we have this on the default layer, 0, 0, and currently it is set to line. So if we were to work with this right now and we go into our preview, it is just going to cut a box out in that shape. Now we can change the mode. Think of line as following that path. Now that can both be a cut or it can just be a score. It can even just be an engraving. Depends on the power level you put at this. So if we took our little grid here and applied the power settings to it, so we can double click on this and it'll open up another window. And now we can input our power. We said 500 millimeters a minute, not 550, 500. And we wanted to go 80 to 90% power, 85. From there, it will follow this path at those speed and power settings. And knowing that we tested on this material, it should cut that out. Now we can also change this from a line to a fill. Now, when I go with a fill, it is going to color in this. Now, I actually have a setting changed to do this. And if you want to do that, you can come into settings and right up here in filled rendering, which is slower. When you, I had that turned on. If I turn this off, it's going to go back to just being an outline. I find having the filled rendering on allows me to see things a little bit better and know that for sure that that is an engrave. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that back on. Just a little tip that may help you in setting up your engravings versus your just your line operations or your cuts. So as long as we have that set to fill in this, now we can also come in here and change our speed and power settings. So we can take our gradient of engravings here and say that we want it to be dark but not overly deep. So we're going to go actually at 10,000 millimeters a minute and about 50% power. And that should give us an engraving here right in the middle that will be a decent solid marking, but not too much burning through the layers, too deep on there. So those are how you can interact with vectors. And if we wanted to, we could even have it do a line and a cut. Now there's two different ways to do this. We could draw the box again, or we can come back into the layer. We can actually add a sub layer. So this would be the second operation we'd do on it. And here we can have it be mode of line, and then we can input our 500 millimeters a minute and 85% power. Now what it'll do is it's going to go and fill this in first, and then it'll come back on that same line and cut it out. So you'll see that over here in mode, it's switched from line or fill to multi. So if you want to remove that, we can just come in to this layer and hit the subtract button there, and now it'll just default to the first one, which is fill. Now you also have your layers down here. So if we wanted to have a second operation separate from this, we could have another box. We could just draw it around that like so. And then we could actually come here and select blue, which is also set to fill, but we're going to go to line. And now we have our black layer, which is set to multi again. So we're going to go back here and hit the subtract and hit OK instead of cancel. Now that's back to fill. It'll do that first. Now it'll do this line on the blue layer as an offset. So you want to get used to playing with your layers. Use your different operations there, and then double clicking into each one to set your speed and power settings. So the other one being raster, we can import raster. So a lot of times that's going to be your photographs. So if we go ahead and come up here to our import tool, that's this fourth icon over at the top, click on that, and let's just bring in this image of this fine looking individual. And here we can play around. We can scale it down to a certain size, but you'll notice on the mode here, it says image. And so it's not going to detect it as any sort of pathing that it can work with. But in here, we can come in to play around with the image settings. And engraving images in Lightburn is something to, it's a bit of an art. You're going to need to do a little pre-processing on the photo. You tend to want to have a little bit of higher contrast to it. And then you're going to come in and play around with your power and speed settings, which will give you your darkness ratings. But they're going to be doing it on from a 0 to your maximum power to do kind of the shading that you see. So it's going to run less power here in the white areas and more power in the darker areas. The other thing you can do is your image mode, and so this is also considered the dithering. And so from here, it'll give you a bit of a sample down below. Right now, it's on Atkinson. If we switch it to Jarvis, you kind of notice that it drops off the dark sooner. Maybe has a slightly bigger spacing between the dots, all the way up to here's a newsprint. They're more of a bold coloration. So things that you're going to want to play with. You'll want to run some tests with this as well to kind of figure out what's best with your laser. Other things that affect this is going to be your DPI, your dots per inch, which is also going to be varying based on what is the kerf or the spot size of your laser. A lot of stuff that gets more advanced, and maybe we can do a video on that later, but wanted to show you some of the features of working with just an image and doing just an engraving versus your raster items, which you can do a fill and a cut. Now, if you wanted to cut this shape out, you'd have to do what's considered an image trace. And we can just try that real quick. You're going to come up to tools with the image selected, and you're going to come to trace image. And here you will see the purple lines are where it's noticing boundaries. And you can actually fade the image to see it a little bit better. So you can see that it is getting the outline around me, but it's also seeing this inner part, this white, as part of the boundary, as well as those. So what you can do is play around with the cutoff, and you can try to slide it in or out, and mess around a little bit with the threshold as well to try to get just what you're looking for. But oftentimes you're going to have to find something that's pretty close and then go back in with node editing if you're just truly trying to get a border around this item. There's other things you can do with masking as well to draw things in. But again, this is kind of a little bit of an art and playing around with what settings work well to try to find what's going to work best, both for the image engraving as well as trying to cut out around it. Now, of course, we can just put a custom box around this or whatnot. And realistically, I wouldn't find myself necessarily cutting this out, but there are ways to mask that off. And again, these are more advanced features, but I wanted to just touch on a little bit each of the ones, the image, the fill, and the line modes, just to have a better understanding what these are so you can start playing around a bit. So let's set up a very simple project. All right, so one of the projects that I would recommend you play around with after you've done your speed and power test for both cutting and engraving is let's just make a simple keychain. These are things that people really enjoy. You can personalize them very easy with the laser. So what I'm going to do is just start out by drawing a rough shape for a keychain. And so I'm going to take the circle or the ellipse tool here, and we're going to zoom in, just scrolling in a little bit. And we are going to draw a bit of an oval shape here. Right now, you can scale this as at whatever size you want, but we're going to kind of just get the shape first. And so I kind of like it a little bit elongated like this. And that's going to start us out okay. And what you can also do now is if you want this to be a specific size, we can select that object. You can come up here and you can use the positioning to put it in the work area, but you can also use the width and the height. Now, one thing to keep in mind is this padlock locks the aspect ratio or unlocks it, so you can either stretch and skew it, or you can lock it to where you can just scale it and it'll keep the same shape. We want to keep this shape, so I'm going to go ahead and lock that. And then we can play around with these numbers for width and height. Now, I have mine set to millimeters because I often work in metric with these machines. But if you want to, you can switch from metric to imperial just by clicking on this, and now it'll be in inches. So for in this one, we want this one to be roughly, I'm going to say 1.25 inches tall. And that gives us almost 3.25 inches wide, which isn't too bad for a keychain. You got to remember this is going to be in pockets, and you want it to be big enough to be able to see whatever engraving you put on there, but not so big that it's unwieldy. So we will we'll go with this. Actually, let's make it 3.25 wide, and then yeah, it's just a touch over 1.25 inches tall. A little bit of trial and error here, but we're going to play with that. So we have our basic shape here. Now we're of course making a keychain, so I got to add a cutout for the little keychain circle here. So now if I hold down Shift, this will keep this a perfectly round circle. rather than being able to stretch and skew it. So I'm going to hold shift, kind of roughly draw it here. And then I know that I want this to be roughly about an 1/8 inch in diameter. So width and height are going to be the same. I'm just going to go 0.125. And actually, no, let's make this 0.15, just a little bit bigger. Now, if we want to perfectly align these, we can use another tool in here. I'm going to go ahead and select both of these. And if we come up here, we have our align tools. And you have your align vertically and align horizontally. So I'm going to click here and we can align them to top, horizontal center, or bottom. We want align horizontal center, and we had them pretty close. You probably didn't see too much movement, but that did move them both so that these are perfectly in line with the center. Now, I don't like this being quite that far away from the edge. We are going to be putting a keychain loop on here. So you can either drag this over, and again, if you hold shift, it will keep it from moving up and down too much. It'll kind of lock it in that plane. If you really stretch it, it'll go in one direction or other, but it won't let you go diagonal. So I'm going to hit undo for that. Right, the other way we can adjust this is through the arrow keys. So we can just hit the arrow keys by themselves, and you see it moves that, a little bit at a time, maybe about 1/8 of an inch. If I hold down shift, it's going to jump over a lot more. Or if I hold down control, it's going to move even less. So I'm just going to inch that over a little bit closer to that border here. We don't want it too close because that could cause things to break, but we do want it to be close enough that it's easy to get the key ring in. So here we've set up our basic shapes of the keychain. I'm just going to go ahead and select them both, and I want to group them just so that they stay together and we don't accidentally move the hole from the keychain. So up here at the top, you see this, it looks like a little group of people as well as an individual. These are our group and ungroup settings. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. But as you also notice, as I mouse and hold over an icon, it also gives us kind of the shortcut, a quick quick summary of what it is, and then also the shortcut, the keyboard shortcut. So we could do Control Command G, and that would also group these. So I'm just going to go ahead and click that. Now they are grouped. So if I just select one, they're both going to move together, and we won't be able to distort their orientation to each other. So we have that set up. Now what I want to do is go ahead and add a little bit of an engraving here. So we're just going to click on our text tool, and we'll type down or click over here, and you'll see a cursor up here. Now our text tools are all going to be up here. So we have our font, we have our bold and italicize and whatnot options, as well as our size. So we can adjust our font size here with the height option. We can scroll that down, and as you notice, our cursor has shrunk down quite a bit. Lightburn. All right, so we have that set up now. That's not a very exciting font, and also we have it on the same layer that is our line. So go ahead and switch this over to our black layer, which we've got set up as our fill right now. And I want to choose a different font. So we're going to click here, and what this is going to bring up is basically all of your system fonts. So if you have a font installed on your computer and Lightburn can read it, it's going to pull it in as an option here as well. So as a matter of fact, I'm going to bring this down over here. So when we drop our menu down, we can still see the examples, because it does give you a preview as we scroll through these. So a nice little preview. You can kind of see what it's going to look like, and you can just kind of scroll through all your fonts and find one that you really like. Over time, you may want to pick out some favorites and keep examples of those for people to look into if you're creating custom items. But know that you can also add fonts to this by adding to your system fonts. Now, you do want to make sure that when you download the fonts, that they are available for more than just personal use if you're going to be selling items. Same thing with any artwork you import as raster images or vector images. Make sure you have the rights to use those, and if you're going to sell them, that they allow you to have commercial rights. So we're just going to go ahead and pick this copper plate Gothic bold, and it has kind of a nice look to it. You can try to play around with the bold and the italicized items if you want, just to change the look again. And then, of course, we can rotate this with our tools as well. And you can even come here and scale it if you don't want to use the font selection tool. So I'm going to make that however big we feel we need. And then once again, I'm going to select both items and I'm going to just use our align object horizontally and center, and it just bumped the keychain up a little bit. So now the last thing to do is come back over to our layers. We want to make sure we get these set up correctly. So, and also I want to reorder them. By default, Lightburn is going to process these in the order that you have them selected here. So I really want it to do the engraving first. So I'm going to move this layer up to the first spot. That'll make it do that one first, and then it'll come down and do the line. So once again, for this, we're going to reference our grid here, and I'm going to go with about 12,060 for this one. So we're going to bump this up to 12,000, and we're going to bump this up to 60. Bidirectional fill is that it engraves in both directions. And so instead of being like a typewriter where to type a line and then return and type a line and return, it's going to burn in both directions. That helps speed things up. Line interval is going to be how many lines or how far it moves in as it's filling. So again, this is something to play with. You can get different textures by spacing those out more than the spot size, or you can have some overlap. Again, this is going to be a little bit of personal preference, how it interacts with your various material, but something to adjust. And then lines per inch is like your DPI, and that's affected by your line interval. So we are going to stick with just one pass on here. And this fill all shapes at once versus groups or individually, those can have effect on your time, but also the quality of your image. We're going to leave it all at once because I want it to scan across all the letters. Otherwise, it would go through and fill in each letter one by one. You might not get the same quality, and it may take longer that way. So we're going to leave it at fill all shapes at once. I'm going to click down to the blue layer and we're going to adjust our cut settings. So again, we're going to reference our other material test card. We want to change this to 500 millimeters a minute, and we want that up at 85% power. That should ensure that we cut through both the inner circle and the outer circle. Number passes 1, you can adjust this. In some cases, you may have thicker material and you want it to go faster, but make multiple passes. This is an option you can set in here. And kerf offset, there's a whole nother video I have on that. What this is doing is if you need to have pieces that interlock tightly together and you don't want there to be any wiggle space, you need to take into account the kerf of the cut, which is the width of the beam. And the beam's going to basically following that line on center. So you're going to be taking half of that beam and it's going to actually be going inside your part versus outside your part. And that can create a gap between the two. We're not going to worry about kerf offset here, but if you want to learn more about it, I do have a video as well about how to figure out what the kerf is for your laser. And we'll talk about it a little bit in some projects down the road. But we now have our basic settings for both these sets. So I'm going to go hit OK. Now the only other thing we can do is we can go ahead and hit our preview button. This will bring up a little bit of window. It's going to give you some information on what your job is going to look like. So we can see here Lightburn is engraved, and then we have our inner and outer cuts. And if you drag your bar across here, it will bring it back and you can play it forward. So you see it's going to engrave Lightburn top to bottom, and then it's going to come over and it's going to cut the first keyhole. It always works from the inside out, and then it's going to do the outside cut again. So all that looks good. This is estimating the time of about 56 seconds. Depending on how your laser is set up, may be accurate or not, but it'll give you a rough idea. So once we're confident about that, we can go ahead and back to the laser, get it centered up on our material, and run the job. So we're going to do that, and we'll check it out when it's done. So anyway, that's where we're going to wrap this up here. Again, just wanted to give a bit of an intro to people who are struggling a little bit with how to get started with Lightburn. I hope you found this useful. If you did, leave a comment down below. Always great to hear about that. If you have more questions or something else that you'd like to learn about, go ahead and leave that comment down below as well. I would be happy to tailor more of these videos towards topics you want to learn. And if it's something I don't know, there's plenty of other of my content creation friends out there in the laser world. I'll have links to a few of them down below. My good friend David, the Clock Shack, has a lot of resources on Lightburn and using your lasers. Louisiana Hobby Guy is another great one who has a lot of tutorials in Lightburn, as well as many others. So check out those links down below. It's part of my ethos that I believe that the more we promote each other and support each other, we all rise up. So I'm not saying I'm the only one you should listen to by any means. There's a lot of good people out there with good information, and I'm happy to share them with you as well. So anyway, again, thanks for checking this out. I hope it was helpful, and I hope to see you again in the future. But in the meantime, I hope you can get out into your workshop and make something too. Catch you soon.